They kept them in locked cabinets, behind metal doors. In museum basements, nobody was allowed to enter. Skeletons, 7 feet tall, 8 feet, some even taller. The Smithsonian Institution received over 1,500 reports between 1863 and 1932. Giant human remains, from 37 states, verified by local physicians, measured by county officials, photographed next to normal-sized men for scale. And then they vanished. Not lost, not misplaced, systematically removed from public record. Entire collections disappeared overnight, display cases emptied, catalog entries erased. You won't find them in any museum today. You won't see them in textbooks. The official story says they never existed, that every single report was a hoax, that 1,500 separate accounts from doctors, archaeologists, and farmers across 70 years were all lies or mistakes. But the newspaper archives tell a different story. The photographs that survived tell a different story. And the pattern of how these discoveries were handled, that tells the most disturbing story of all. Look, I know how this sounds. Giants. Sounds like fairy tales. Sounds like bad fantasy movies. But here's what they don't tell you in school. The 19th century was the golden age of American archaeology. Thousands of burial mounds dotted the landscape from Ohio to Oklahoma. Native American earthworks older than anyone could date. And when settlers started opening them, often illegally, often destroying irreplaceable history, they found things that didn't fit, things that still don't fit. So here's my question for you, and I want you to think about this, really think about it. If you found a skeleton 7.5 feet tall in a burial mound in 1876, and you were a small-town doctor in Kentucky, what would you do? Would you lie about it? Risk your reputation? Make up measurements you could easily be called out on? Or would you report exactly what you saw? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because the official explanation is that they all lied. Every single one of them, for 70 years, across 36 states, with nothing to gain and their professional reputations to lose. That's what they want us to believe. Let me take you back. 1883, Moundsville, West Virginia. Dr. Nathaniel Henderson was not a sensationalist. 52 years old, practiced medicine for 28 years, delivered over 600 babies, testified in court cases, respected member of the Marshall County Medical Society. On April 9th, workers building a new rail line cut through a burial mound near the Ohio River. Inside, a stone chamber, walls fitted together without mortar, floor covered in mica sheets, and lying on a platform of flat stones, a skeleton. Henderson measured it himself, used a standard surveyor's chain. Documented it in his field notes. 7 feet 11 inches from heel to crown. The skull was massive, jaw thick enough that Henderson noted he could fit his entire fist inside the mouth cavity. Teeth intact, no sign of disease or deformity, just proportionally larger than any human skull he'd ever examined. He wasn't alone. 6 other men witnessed the excavation. The rail company foreman, 2 engineers, 3 laborers, all signed statements. All gave matching descriptions. Henderson sent a telegram to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, offered to ship the entire skeleton for study. Received a reply within 3 days. Very interested. Send immediately. All costs covered. He crated the bones, packed them in sawdust and straw, shipped them via rail to the Smithsonian's Department of Ethnology on May 2, 1883. The Smithsonian logged the delivery. Receipt signed by Dr. William Henry Holmes, assistant curator. Later became one of the most prominent anthropologists in America. And then, nothing. No paper published, no catalog entry, no display, no mention in the Smithsonian's annual reports for that year or any year after. Henderson wrote 3 letters asking about the specimen. No response. 4th letter, brief reply. Materials received, under study. Will notify when analysis complete. Never heard back. 40 years later, in 1923, Henderson's grandson tried to locate the skeleton, wrote to the Smithsonian, provided his grandfather's original telegram, the shipping receipt, the signed witness statements. Smithsonian's reply? No record of any such delivery. No specimen matching that description in their collections. Perhaps Dr. Henderson was mistaken about where he sent it. But the receipt existed. The telegram existed. The witnesses were all dead by then, but their sworn statements remained in Henderson's personal files. The bones went somewhere. Someone signed for them. Someone logged them into a system, and then someone made them disappear. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Henderson wasn't unique. His case wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. Between 1864 and 1934, newspapers across America published over 2,000 accounts of giant skeletal remains. I'm not talking about tabloids. I'm talking about the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, local county papers with reputations to maintain. Let me give you a few examples. And these are exact quotes from archived newspapers you can verify yourself. New York Times, May 11, 1892. Excavation near Crittenden, Arizona. Quote, the body was nearly 8 feet long, the skull of extraordinary size. The femur measured 26 inches in length compared to the average of 18 inches. Unquote. The Times. Not some rural gossip sheet. The newspaper of record. San Diego Union, August 5, 1895. Discovery on Santa Rosa Island, California. Quote, skeletal remains of a man of gigantic proportions. Height estimated at over 7.5 feet. Found in association with stone implements of remarkable quality. Unquote. These reports included details, measurements, witness names, location coordinates, things that could be checked, things that could be disproven if false. And they kept appearing, decade after decade. But here's the thing that should make you pause. Starting around 1903, the tone changed. Reports became shorter, less detailed, fewer measurements. And a new phrase started appearing in almost every account. Sent to the Smithsonian for study. Over and over. Different states, different years, always the same destination. Let me show you the pattern. 1899, Maple Creek, Wisconsin. Skeleton 7 feet 6 inches, sent to Smithsonian. 1904, Dunleith, Illinois. Remains of unusual height, sent to Smithsonian. 1908, Clearwater, Minnesota. Giant femur and skull fragments, sent to Smithsonian. 1912. Jackson, Ohio. Complete skeleton estimated at 8 feet, sent to Smithsonian. 1915. Catalina Island, California. Multiple skeletons of extraordinary size, sent to Smithsonian. You see where this is going? Hundreds of specimens, all sent to one institution. An institution funded by the federal government. An institution that today claims none of these specimens ever arrived. Either every single newspaper lied, every single local official fabricated their reports, every shipping company lost the same kinds of packages for 30 years, or something else happened. Let's talk about the Smithsonian for a second, because this matters. Founded in 1846 with money from British scientist James Smithson. Purpose, quote, increase and diffusion of knowledge. Noble goal. And for decades they did important work, collected specimens, built archives. Advanced American science. But they also had another role, less advertised. In the 1800s, the federal government needed to control the narrative about who had been in America first. This wasn't just academic, this was political. Land rights, tribal treaties, manifest destiny, all depended on maintaining a specific story about the continent's history. Native Americans had oral traditions about giants. The Paiutes in Nevada spoke of the Siteka, red-haired giants who lived in caves, cannibals, enemies. The Paiutes claimed they'd fought a war against them generations ago, drove them into Lovelock Cave, sealed the entrance, burned them out. White settlers dismissed these as myths, savage superstition, until 1911. Miners at Lovelock Cave in Nevada, extracting bat guano for fertilizer, found human remains, skeletons, red hair still attached to skulls preserved by the dry cave environment. And these skeletons were tall, very tall. Local papers reported heights between 7 and 8 feet. Witnesses included the mining company supervisor, county coroner. University of California sent an archaeologist named Llewellyn Loud to investigate. Loud confirmed unusual skeletal proportions, documented red hair samples, noted stone tools and weapons of sophisticated design, spent 3 months cataloging the site, published preliminary findings in 1912, mentioned remarkable skeletal remains, but gave no specific measurements, said full analysis would follow, never published the full analysis, died in 1928. His field notes, missing. The skeletal material he collected, you guessed it, sent to various institutions for study, including the Smithsonian. Today, the official position on Lovelock Cave is that normal-sized Native Americans lived there. Any reports of giants, misidentification, poor measurement technique, exaggeration. But the red hair samples still exist. University of Nevada has them. DNA tested in 2004. Results? Mitochondrial DNA consistent with ancient Native American populations. So the hair was real. The cave was real. The stone tools were real. The only thing disputed, the height of the people who left those remains. Why? Now, before you think I'm pushing some crazy conspiracy, let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not claiming there was a race of 20-foot-tall monsters. I'm not saying giants built the pyramids or came from Atlantis or any of that nonsense. What I'm saying is this. The archaeological record of 19th century America contains hundreds of documented cases of human remains that exceeded normal size parameters, 7 to 8 feet, sometimes taller, reported by credible witnesses, measured by medical professionals, photographed in some cases. And those reports stopped appearing in the 1930s, not because people stopped finding anomalous remains, but because the institutions receiving those remains stopped acknowledging them publicly. The question isn't whether giants existed. The question is, what happened to the physical evidence? Because evidence doesn't just vanish on its own. People make it vanish. People with reasons. People with authority. And that's what nobody wants to talk about. Let me show you something, because this gets personal. 1924, Lansing, Kansas. Construction crew digging foundation for a new school. 8 feet down, stone-lined chamber. Inside, 3 skeletons arranged in sitting positions facing east. The foreman called Dr. William Thompson, local physician. Thompson examined the remains on site, made detailed notes. The largest skeleton measured 7 feet 8 inches, robust bone structure, skull with pronounced brow ridge, dentition intact and healthy. Thompson photographed the excavation, black and white images. You can see the skulls.
You can see the long bones laid out on canvas. You can see the measuring tape stretched alongside for scale. He kept one photograph in his office, showed it to patients as a curiosity. My grandfather saw that photograph in 1949 when he was a boy. Broken arm. Dr. Thompson set it. While they waited for the plaster to dry, Thompson told him the story. Said the skeletons went to the University of Kansas Anthropology Department. Said they promised to put them on display. Never happened. He inquired twice. Both times told the specimens were in storage pending further study. Thompson died in 1953. His practice was liquidated. Medical records scattered. But that photograph, my grandfather remembered it, described it to me when I was 15, said it stuck with him. The size of those skulls, the length of those femurs. I tried to find it, called the Kansas Historical Society, checked University of Kansas archives, contacted Thompson's descendants. Nothing.
No photograph, no excavation records, no specimens in university storage. But the school still stands, built right on top of where those remains were found. And in the school basement, if you know where to look, you can still see the original foundation stones, the ones the construction crew pulled from that burial chamber. They're limestone, cut and fitted, edges worn smooth, not random rocks. Worked stone, placed with intention. Who buried 3 7-foot-tall individuals in a stone chamber facing east? When? Why? The official history of Kansas mentions nothing about pre-Columbian burial practices of that sophistication. Nothing about populations of unusual height. Nothing about stone chamber construction. It's like it never happened. Except the school sits on those stones, and my grandfather's memory sits in my head. And somewhere, maybe in a museum basement, maybe in a storage facility, maybe destroyed, those bones existed. They were real. Someone measured them. Someone photographed them. Someone took them away. So let's ask the uncomfortable question. Why would anyone want to hide evidence of unusually tall human populations in ancient America? Follow the logic. If you're building a narrative about the settlement of the Americas, you need it simple. Hunter-gatherer tribes crossed the Bering Strait 12,000 years ago, spread south, built basic cultures. No complex societies until much later. Clean, linear, uncomplicated. Now, introduce skeletal evidence of 7 to 8 foot humans with sophisticated burial practices, stone chamber construction, burial mounds that required engineering knowledge. Suddenly, the narrative gets messy. Questions emerge. Were these a different population? Did they predate known Native American groups? Were they European, Middle Eastern, something else entirely? And if they were something else, what happened to them? Where did they go? Why did they disappear?
These questions threaten established timelines. They complicate land rights. They suggest the history we teach might be incomplete or wrong. Much easier to say it never happened, that every report was mistaken, that measurements were incorrect, that photographs were faked. Except the photographs weren't faked. The measurements weren't all incorrect. The witnesses weren't all lying. The evidence was real. It just became
inconvenient. 1897. A photograph appears in multiple newspapers, shows excavation in progress, County, Minnesota. 6 men standing in a ditch. At their feet, a skeleton laid out on wooden planks. The skeleton is enormous. Even in the photograph, you can see the proportions are wrong. The skull dwarfs the men's heads. The femurs extend past the edge of the planks. Caption reads, "Giant skeleton unearthed near Grand Rapids. Height estimated 9 feet 6 inches.
Witnessed by county surveyor and local physician. That photograph was reprinted in at least 4 newspapers I've verified. Different states, different dates, same image. Today, skeptics claim the photo is a hoax, digital manipulation, early photographic trickery. But here's the problem. This was 1897. Photographic manipulation existed. You could do double exposures, forced perspective, that kind of thing. But this image doesn't show signs of those techniques. The lighting is consistent. The shadows fall correctly. The grain and focus are uniform. And, more importantly, the photo appeared in legitimate newspapers. Papers that employed photographers. Papers that checked their sources. Papers that would be ruined if caught publishing obvious frauds. Could all 4 newspapers be fooled? Possible, but improbable. The more likely explanation: the photo was real. The skeleton was real. The measurements might have been exaggerated, sure. Maybe it was 8 feet instead of 9. Maybe the surveyor rounded up. But something unusual was in that ditch. Something that made 6 grown men stop their work and send for a photographer. Something that newspapers thought their readers would find credible enough to print. What happened to that skeleton? Sent to the University of Minnesota for analysis, according to the follow-up article published 3 weeks later. Anthropology department received it. Professor John Hewitt planned to study it. I searched University of Minnesota's archives. No Professor John Hewitt in their records from that period. No specimen matching that description in their collections. No mention in departmental reports. Either the name was wrong, or the university was wrong, or both. But the photograph exists, archived on microfilm, preserved in library collections. You can see it yourself if you know where to look. Those men in the photograph aren't actors. That ditch isn't a studio. That skeleton isn't a prop. It was real. It went somewhere. And now it's gone. Let me tell you what really bothers me about this whole thing. It's not that unusual skeletal remains were found. Genetic anomalies exist. Gigantism is a real condition. Throughout history, some humans have grown to 7 feet, 8 feet, occasionally taller. That's documented. That's known. What bothers me is the pattern of suppression. See, if these were just random cases of medical abnormalities, why not say that? Why not catalog them, study them, put them in medical museums as examples of genetic conditions? But that's not what happened. Instead, they were collected and removed from public view. Reports stopped being published. Newspapers stopped covering new discoveries. The entire phenomenon just faded from public consciousness. Almost like someone decided the narrative needed to change. That these finds were problematic. That the simplest solution was to make them disappear and deny they ever existed. And before you say, "That's crazy, the government wouldn't do that," remember, this is the same government that conducted radiation experiments on unwitting citizens. The same institutions that performed Tuskegee experiments. The same organizations that ran MK Ultra. Suppressing archaeological findings that complicate official narratives? That's nothing. That's easy. You just stop reporting them. Stop cataloging them. Stop allowing public access. And within 2 generations, nobody remembers they existed at all. Except they did exist.
The evidence is in the newspapers, in the photographs, in the testimonies of hundreds of witnesses. You just have to look for it. You just have to be willing to ask why it all went away. Now let me show you something that's going to make your skin crawl. Because this isn't just about America. This pattern appears worldwide. 1895, Castelnau, France.
Workers excavating a Bronze Age burial site. 3 skeletons. Measured by the site's chief archaeologist, Georges Vacher de la Pouge.
Heights between 7 feet 6 inches and 8 feet. Vacher de la Pouge was not a fringe figure. University educated, published dozens of peer-reviewed papers. His measurements were precise, his documentation meticulous. He sent the bones to the Paris Natural History Museum. They arrived. They were catalogued, specimen numbers assigned. Today, not on display. Not in storage where researchers can access them. The museum claims they were lost during World War I. Building damage, collections scattered. Possible? Sure. France was devastated by that war. Records were destroyed, artifacts lost. But convenient. 1900, County Antrim, Ireland. Peat bog workers find a skeleton, perfectly preserved by the acidic water. Red hair, over 7 feet tall. Displayed at the Ulster Museum for 16 years. People came to see it, photographed, documented.
And then in 1916, removed from display. Reason given, making room for new exhibits. Where did it go? Storage. Which storage facility? Records don't say. Current location? Unknown.
1903, Lovelock Cave, Nevada. We already covered that one. 1912, Wisconsin burial mounds. Covered that too. 1924, Lansing, Kansas. Covered it. Different continents, different cultures, different time periods. Same pattern. Find unusual remains. Document them. Send them to official institutions. Remains disappear. At what point does coincidence become conspiracy? At what point do we stop saying probably lost and start asking deliberately hidden? Here's what we know for certain. Between 1860 and 1935, over 1,500 reports of giant skeletal remains were published in American newspapers. Multiple witnesses, medical professionals, photographic evidence in at least 40 cases.
Starting around 1903, most specimens were sent to the Smithsonian Institution or major universities for study. By 1940, reports of new discoveries effectively stopped appearing in print. Today, no major American museum displays skeletal remains exceeding 7 feet from pre-Columbian contexts. The Smithsonian claims no such specimens exist in their collections. Universities say the same. Either the greatest concentration of gigantism cases in human history occurred in 19th century America, and every single specimen vanished through coincidence and poor record-keeping, or someone decided these finds were problematic and removed them from public knowledge. I know which explanation makes more sense to me. So, here's where we are. We've got hundreds of newspaper reports, dozens of witness testimonies, multiple photographs, excavation records, shipping receipts, all pointing to the same thing. Unusually large human remains were found across America in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And we've got institutional denial. Missing specimens, lost records, changed narratives. What we don't have, and this is crucial, is access to the physical evidence. Can't DNA test bones that don't exist. Can't carbon date specimens that are gone. Can't measure skulls locked in basement storage we're not allowed to enter.
We're left with documents, with testimonies, with photographs that raise questions, but can't provide final answers. Unless some of those specimens didn't actually disappear. Unless some got tucked away in places nobody thinks to look. Unless someone, somewhere, decided to keep evidence that was supposed to be destroyed. And that brings me to Rockwall, Texas, 1852, where something was found that changes everything. But I'm not going to tell you what it is, not yet.
Because in the next part, we're going underground, into a chamber that shouldn't exist, to examine walls that can't be explained, to see markings that don't match any known language, and to understand why, after the discovery in Rockwall, the federal government stepped in personally, why they sealed the site, why they threatened anyone who talked about what they found. The bones were one thing. What they found in Rockwall, that's something else entirely. Rockwall, Texas. Population 347 in 1852. Named after what settlers thought was a natural rock formation. Except it wasn't natural. Terry Wade was digging a well on his property. April 16th, 1852. 12 feet down, his shovel hit something solid. Not bedrock, not limestone, definitely not clay. Stone. Dressed stone. Smooth surface, vertical. He called his neighbor, Benjamin Boydston. They dug wider, exposed more of the structure. The stone face continued, perfectly vertical. Running east to west as far as they could trace it. They followed it, dug test holes every 30 feet. The wall kept going. Under Boydston's property, under the creek bed, under what's now Main Street. Wade and Boydston weren't educated men, but they knew construction. They'd built houses, laid foundations. They understood stonework. This wasn't random geology. This was architecture. Underground architecture. Buried so deep that trees 200 years old grew on top of it. Word spread. Within a month, 20 families were digging on their properties. All found the same thing. A continuous stone structure running beneath the town, extending beyond its boundaries in every direction. Not a wall. Walls have two sides. This was more like the foundation of something enormous. Something that had been covered over. Something ancient. The town changed its name. Rockwall. Because of the wall made of rock. Simple as that. And then, people started finding the chambers. Let me be clear about something. I went to Rockwall. Spent 3 days there in September 2023. Talked to locals, researched county records, examined what's left of the original excavation sites. Most of the wall is still there, still underground, still unexplained. The official story from the Texas Historical Commission is that it's a natural geological formation, fractured sandstone, erosion patterns, mineral deposits that created the illusion of worked stone. I stood on property where the wall runs, looked at exposed sections, touched the surface. That is not erosion. That is not natural fracturing. The stones are fitted. Corners meet at right angles. Seams are tight enough you can't fit a knife blade between blocks. And the surface texture, smooth, too smooth, like it was worked, polished. Geologists from 3 universities have examined it. University of Texas, Southern Methodist University, Texas A&M. All concluded natural formation. But none of them could explain the chambers, because that's where it gets interesting. In 1855, a farmer named John Stevenson was excavating deeper sections of the wall on his land. 22 feet down, he broke through into a hollow space, a chamber. Roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, height about 7 feet. Walls made of the same fitted stone, floor covered in a layer of fine sand, ceiling supported by what looked like corbelled arches. Empty. Completely empty. No artifacts, no markings, no human remains. Just a room, underground, sealed. Buried under enough earth that oak trees with roots reaching 20 feet down didn't penetrate it. Stevenson reported it to the county. County surveyor documented it, made drawings, took measurements. That chamber was filled in within a week. Reason given: safety hazard. Could collapse, might undermine nearby structures. But Stevenson kept his drawings. His grandson donated them to the Rockwall County Library in 1968. I saw them. Detailed sketches, precise measurements, notes in the margins. One note stood out, written in pencil, small handwriting. Found second chamber, northeast corner. Don't tell county. So Stevenson found another chamber and decided not to report it. Smart man. Because by 1855, something had changed. The federal government had taken interest in Rockwall, not overtly, not officially, but subtly. A man named James Buchanan Harris arrived in town, introduced himself as a surveyor from the General Land Office, said he was mapping property boundaries for the government, routine work, except he wasn't surveying property lines. He was measuring the wall, taking compass readings, making calculations, asking questions about where excavations had occurred, where chambers had been found. He stayed 3 weeks, paid well for information, asked specifically about any artifacts discovered. Any inscriptions, any unusual features. And then he left. Told the town council that any further excavation of the wall required federal approval. Said it was on government land, which was a lie. All the land was privately owned, deeds filed, taxes paid. But nobody challenged him. Because James Buchanan Harris worked for President Franklin Pierce's administration. And in 1855, you didn't challenge federal authority in Texas. Excavations stopped. Not by law, by fear. People who kept digging anyway found their wells mysteriously filled in overnight. Their property tax assessments suddenly increased. Small harassments, enough to make the point. Leave the wall alone. Most people did, but Stevenson didn't. He dug at night, quietly, on the far corner of his property where oak trees provided cover. And he found his second chamber, bigger than the first, with something inside. Now here's where the story gets murky, because Stevenson never wrote down exactly what he found. Never made drawings of it, never showed it to anyone except his wife and eldest son. What we have is family oral history, passed down 5 generations. Stories told by grandchildren who heard them from grandparents who were there. Oral history is tricky. Details distort, facts blur, but the core narrative stays consistent. According to Stevenson's descendants, the second chamber contained a stone table, or maybe an altar, rectangular, 3 feet high, made from a different type of stone than the walls, black stone, smooth, almost glass-like. On the surface of this table, carvings, symbols, not letters, not pictures, something in between. Geometric patterns that repeated, circles within circles, lines radiating from central points, spirals. Stevenson traced them, made rubbings using charcoal and paper, tried to decipher them, failed. The symbols didn't match any language he knew, didn't match Native American petroglyphs common in the region, didn't match European alphabets.
He showed the rubbings to a priest in Dallas. Father Michael O'Brien, Irish, educated, well-traveled. O'Brien studied them for 3 days, then told Stevenson to destroy them. Burn the papers, never speak of what he'd found, seal the chamber, forget it existed. Why? What did O'Brien see that terrified him? He never said. But 2 weeks later he left Dallas, returned to Ireland, never came back to America. And Stevenson did what he was told, filled in the chamber, destroyed his rubbings, told his family never to dig there again. But he kept one thing, a small piece of the black stone, broke it off the table before he filled the chamber, kept it wrapped in cloth, hidden in his desk. That stone passed down through his family, generation to generation. And in 1997, his great-great-granddaughter, Jennifer Stevenson Walsh, had it analyzed. Sent a sample to a geology lab in Houston, paid for mineral composition testing, wanted to know what it was. Results came back.
The stone was basalt, common volcanic rock. Nothing unusual about the mineral content. But the lab noted something odd. The stone showed evidence of being worked at extremely high temperatures. Surface had a fused quality, like it had been heated until partially molten, then cooled rapidly. Creating that effect would require temperatures above 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, and tools capable of shaping stone at that temperature, which shouldn't exist. Not in pre-industrial America, not anywhere in the 1800s. Jennifer still has that stone fragment. I asked to see it. She declined. Said too many people already think her family's crazy. Said she's received threats. Had her house broken into twice. Nothing stolen, just searched. Someone wants that stone. Someone doesn't want people asking questions about what her ancestor found. But the chambers weren't the strangest part, because in 1856, they found the skull.
William McAdams owned land on the southern edge of Rockwall. Cattle rancher, practical man, didn't believe in mysteries. When his workers found the wall running under his south pasture, he ordered them to break through it. Needed to widen a cattle pond. Wall was in the way. They used pickaxes, sledgehammers. The stone was harder than expected. Took 2 days to breach a section wide enough to work through. Behind the wall, another chamber, larger, maybe 15 feet across, circular. And in the center of the floor, a burial. Not a burial mound, not a grave with sides and a bottom. More like the body had been placed on the original floor before the chamber was built. Then the walls erected around it. Then the whole structure buried. The skeleton was massive. McAdams measured the femur himself, 27 inches. For context, average human femur is about 18 inches. Extremely tall modern humans might have femurs up to 22 inches. 27 inches suggests a living height of approximately 8 feet 6 inches. The skull was proportionally huge. McAdams had it photographed next to a normal human skull for comparison. The photograph still exists. In the Rockwall County Archives. I've seen it. The giant skull is nearly twice the size. Bone thickness is incredible. Eye sockets deep set, jaw massive, teeth large, but fully human in structure. McAdams wrapped the skull in canvas, stored it in his barn, planned to send it to a university for analysis. 3 days later, James Buchanan Harris returned to Rockwall. Showed up at McAdams' ranch with 2 federal marshals. Said the skull was government property, needed to be surrendered immediately. McAdams refused. Said it was found on his land, his property, his rights. Harris didn't argue, didn't threaten, just left, calm, polite. That night, McAdams' barn burned down. Total loss. Horses barely escaped. Skull destroyed in the fire. Arson was suspected, never proven.
Investigation lasted 2 weeks. Found no evidence of foul play. Case closed. McAdams never spoke publicly about the incident, but his daughter Catherine recorded the story in her diary. That diary is now held by the Texas State Library and Archives. I requested access. Request denied. Materials classified as restricted access pending donor family approval. Donor family doesn't exist anymore. Last member died in 2009. But the restriction remains indefinitely. Funny how that works. Let me connect some dots for you. We have skeletal remains of unusual size, found nationwide, sent to federal institutions, disappeared. We have an underground structure in Texas, predating known settlements, containing chambers with worked stone and mysterious symbols, actively suppressed by federal agents. We have evidence of advanced stoneworking techniques that shouldn't exist in pre-industrial America. And we have a pattern of systematic destruction and denial spanning over a century. Now add this to the mix. 1908. A geologist named Newton Horace Winchell published a paper about ancient mining operations in the Great Lakes region, specifically copper mining on Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula in Michigan. Native Americans mined copper there. That's established, documented, accepted. But Winchell's analysis showed something odd. The mining operations were far more extensive than previously thought. Pits hundreds of feet long, depths exceeding 70 feet, requiring millions of man-hours to excavate. And the timelines didn't work. Carbon dating suggested the mines were active between 3,000 and 5,000 years ago. But archaeological evidence of Native American populations capable of that scale of operation didn't appear until much later. Someone was mining copper in the Great Lakes 3,000 years ago, industrial-scale mining. But who? Winchell proposed a theory. Based on the massive skeletal remains frequently reported from burial mounds in the region, based on the engineering sophistication required for such mining operations, based on oral traditions from multiple native tribes about a previous race of giants, he suggested these giants were the miners, that they'd had the size, strength, and organizational capacity to conduct mining on that scale. Academic community destroyed him, called his theory unscientific, baseless speculation, said he was damaging his reputation. Winchell died in 1914. His papers were donated to the Minnesota Historical Society. Most survived, but his detailed maps of the mining operations, missing. His calculations of the labor required, gone. His catalog of burial mounds containing giant remains, never found. Today, the official explanation for the ancient copper mines is that Native Americans did it over many centuries, slowly, gradually, using stone tools. Except geologists calculate that moving the amount of rock removed from those mines would require either thousands of workers over centuries with no archaeological evidence of settlements large enough to support that workforce, or a smaller population with significantly greater size and strength working over a shorter time frame. Take your pick. Either explanation has problems, but only one gets you laughed out of academia. Now let's talk about something you've probably never heard of. The Goshen Tunnel, Massachusetts, Berkshire County, 1872. Railroad company blasting through a hillside for a new line. Workers broke into a void, a tunnel, already there, carved through solid rock. The tunnel was roughly circular, 7 feet diameter, walls smooth, no tool marks, no chisel scars, just smooth stone.
like it had been melted rather than carved. Engineers examined it, tried to determine its purpose, tried to figure out who made it, came up with nothing.
The tunnel went horizontal into the hillside for approximately 300 feet, then turned downward at a steep angle. They couldn't safely explore beyond that point. Railroad company decided to incorporate it into their construction, used it as a drainage channel, sealed the entrance with a grate. 2 months later, workers reported strange sounds coming from the tunnel. Low rumbling, almost rhythmic, like machinery running deep underground. The sounds continued for 3 weeks, then stopped, never resumed. Railroad supervisor wrote a report about the incident, sent it to company headquarters in Boston. Company archived it, never investigated, never followed up. That report surfaced in 1963 when the railroad was decommissioned and records were transferred to the Massachusetts State Archives. A researcher named Donald Rogers found it while cataloging materials. Rogers was intrigued, tried to locate the tunnel, found the old rail line, found the hillside. Found where the entrance should be. The entire section had been filled in. Concrete, 50 feet deep. Poured sometime in the 1920s, according to local records. Reason given? Structural stability concerns. Rogers submitted a request to excavate. Denied. Too expensive, too disruptive, no scientific value. He tried again in 1968, same result. Tried a third time in 1974. By then, Interstate 90 had been built directly over the site, making excavation essentially impossible. Convenient timing. Here's what I think is happening, and before you dismiss this, really consider the evidence. Sometime in the distant past, 3,000 years ago, maybe more, a population existed in North America. They were significantly larger than modern humans, 7 to 8 feet on average, maybe taller. They built structures, mined copper, buried their dead in mounds, possibly created the underground complex at Rockwall. Maybe dug tunnels like the one in Goshen. Then they disappeared. War, disease, climate change, whatever. They died out or left. Their structures got buried by time, their bones scattered across the continent. Native Americans arrived later, found ruins, created legends about giants, incorporated those stories into their oral traditions. When Europeans settled America, they started digging, plowing fields, building foundations, opening burial mounds. And they found the remains, the bones, the structures, the evidence. For a while, that evidence was reported, documented, sent to institutions for study. But then someone realized this evidence was problematic. It complicated the historical narrative. It suggested advanced pre-Columbian civilizations. It raised questions about origins and timelines. So decisions were made, high-level decisions, federal decisions, to suppress the evidence, remove it from public view, deny its existence. Not because it was fraudulent, because it was real. And reality was inconvenient. That's the pattern. That's what the evidence suggests. That's why hundreds of specimens vanished, why structures got filled in, why records disappeared. Someone didn't want us to know. But here's the thing about secrets. They never stay completely hidden. Something always leaks out. Some piece of evidence always survives. In 1938, a farmer in White County, Tennessee found a stone box buried 5 feet deep in his tobacco field. The box was carved from a single piece of granite, about 2 feet long, 1 foot wide, 8 inches deep. Lid fitted so precisely it took him an hour to pry it open. Inside, a copper scroll, rolled tight, covered in symbols. The farmer, Thomas Brackett,
was smart enough to recognize this was unusual. He contacted the University of Tennessee. They sent a professor. The professor examined the scroll, got excited, wanted to take it to the university for analysis. Brackett agreed. But first, he made his own copy.
Drew every symbol, every mark. 53 pages of careful drawings. Took him 2 weeks. Good thing he did. The scroll went to the university. Professor planned to photograph it, document it, have linguists examine it. 3 days after arrival, there was a break-in. University Anthropology Department. Nothing stolen except the scroll. Security footage showed 2 men, professional, in and out in 4 minutes, knew exactly what they were looking for. Local police investigated. FBI got involved. Called it interstate theft of cultural artifacts. Federal crime. Case never solved. Scroll never recovered. Professor died in 1943. His notes about the scroll missing from university records. But Brackett's drawings survived. He kept them hidden. Showed them to his son before he died. Said if anything happened, get them to someone trustworthy. His son waited until 2012, then contacted a retired cryptographer named Sarah Chen, former NSA, brilliant woman. Specializes in ancient languages and symbolic systems.
Chen studied Brackett's drawings for 6 months, compared them to every known writing system: Phoenician, Ogham, cuneiform, runic, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Nothing matched. But she found patterns, mathematical patterns, ratios and progressions that suggested the symbols had meaning, structure, grammar. She published a preliminary paper in 2013, academic journal, limited circulation. Her conclusion: the symbols represented a genuine unknown writing system, not a hoax, not random marks, actual language. The paper was cited exactly 0 times. No follow-up research, no academic discussion. It disappeared into the void. Chen tried to publish more detailed analysis. No journal would accept it. She tried presenting at conferences. Invitations were withdrawn. She tried posting her findings online. Website was hacked, files deleted. Last I heard, she moved to Malaysia. Won't discuss her research anymore.
Won't respond to inquiries. But I have her original paper. Downloaded it before it vanished. And her analysis is solid. Mathematical, rigorous, peer-reviewable. Someone doesn't want that analysis discussed. Someone with resources. Someone with reach. So, here we are, looking at 170 years of suppressed evidence, hundreds of witnesses, dozens of photographs, physical specimens that vanished, structures that were buried, records that disappeared, and a clear pattern of federal intervention. From James Buchanan Harris in 1855 to the FBI in 1938 to website hacks in 2013. Someone is maintaining this suppression, actively, continuously, for over a century and a half. The question is why? What's so threatening about evidence of tall humans in ancient America? What's so dangerous about underground structures, or copper mines, or symbolic writing systems? Unless it's not about the giants themselves. Unless the giants are just part of something larger, something more significant, something that fundamentally changes our understanding of human history, of civilization's origins, of who was here before, of what they knew. Because here's what keeps me awake at night. Those chambers at Rockwall weren't random. They were part of a complex, a massive underground complex that extends for miles in every direction. We've only found the edges, the surface features. The symbols on that stone table weren't decorative. They were functional, Instructions, maybe. Warnings, maybe. Something important enough to carve into volcanic rock using technology that melted stone. Those tunnels, like the one in Massachusetts, weren't natural. They were deliberately constructed, leading somewhere, connecting something. And those copper mines in Michigan weren't just mines. They were industrial operations, producing metal on a scale that suggests trade, distribution, a functioning economy. Add it all up. Giants weren't primitive savages. They were builders, engineers, possibly more advanced than we've been willing to admit. And someone knows this. Someone has known this since the 1850s. Someone has been systematically hiding evidence, destroying records, threatening researchers. Someone who understands that if this information became public, if we could prove an advanced pre-Columbian civilization existed in America, it would rewrite everything. Every history book, every timeline, every theory about human development. Everything we think we know would be wrong. Now let me tell you about the file. In 2019, a man contacted me, called himself Robert, wouldn't give a last name, said he was a retired archivist, worked for a federal agency he wouldn't name, spent 30 years managing classified documents, said he'd seen things, files about archaeological suppression, directives to seize specimens, orders to discredit researchers, all classified, all buried. He wanted to go public, but he was old, sick, didn't have much time, needed someone to tell the story. We met once, coffee shop in Alexandria, Virginia. He brought photocopies, 23 pages, partial documents, heavily redacted, but enough to verify his story. One document was a memorandum dated March 18, 1956, addressed to the director of the Smithsonian from the Secretary of the Interior. Subject line: Management of Anomalous Anthropological Materials. The content was clinical, direct, outlined procedures for handling skeletal remains that exceeded normal parameters, required immediate transfer to federal custody, prohibited public display or academic study without approval from, and here's where it gets interesting, the National Security Council. Why would the National Security Council care about old bones? Another document, 1972, internal memo from the Department of the Interior, listed 37 archaeological sites across 12 states, all marked for remediation, which is bureaucratic speak for destruction or concealment. Rockwall was on that list. So was Isle Royale in Michigan. So was the Goshen Tunnel location in Massachusetts. So were burial mound sites in Ohio, Wisconsin, and Tennessee, where giant remains had been reported. Remediation actions included fill excavations, acquire land through eminent domain, construct federal facilities over sites to prevent access. Systematic, planned, executed over decades. Robert gave me those copies, said there were hundreds more pages, said the full archive would explain everything, where the specimens went, who gave the orders, why. I asked where the full archive was. He smiled, said it's safe, said if anything happened to him, arrangements were made, documents would surface. 2 weeks later, Robert died. Heart attack, sudden. No prior history of cardiac problems. I waited for the documents to surface. Nothing. No leak, no release. Whoever had the full archive either destroyed it or is still sitting on it. All I have are those 23 pages, copies of copies. Enough to confirm the suppression was real, not enough to prove exactly who ordered it or why. But it exists. Somewhere in a classified system, there are files, complete files, detailing exactly what was found, where it went,
and why it had to be hidden. Someone knows the full truth, and they've decided we're not allowed to know it. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. If you were in charge, if you discovered evidence of an advanced civilization that predated everything we thought we knew about the Americas, evidence that would overturn academic consensus, evidence that would raise questions about origins, migrations, technological development, would you release it? Would you let the chaos unfold?
Would you risk everything, educational systems, historical narratives, cultural identities, to tell the truth? Or would you quietly bury it, store it in warehouses where nobody looks, classify it for national security, discredit anyone who asks questions, maintain the comfortable lie rather than face the uncomfortable truth? I'm not saying suppression is right. I'm saying it's understandable. Institutions exist to maintain stability. Truth is destabilizing, especially truth that contradicts foundational stories. So they made a choice, a century and a half ago, and they've been maintaining that choice ever since. The giants existed. The structures existed. The evidence existed. It just became inconvenient, so it disappeared. But not completely. Never completely. Because you can't erase truth. You can only hide it. And eventually, someone digs deep enough. Someone asks the right questions. Someone finds the crack in the wall where light gets through. That's what's happening now. That's what I'm trying to do. Shine light through the cracks. Show you what they don't want you to see. Because in the final part, I'm going to tell you about the photograph. The one photograph that survived everything. That proves beyond doubt the giants were real. That shows exactly what they looked like. That demonstrates their size in undeniable terms. A photograph that should have been destroyed decades ago, but wasn't. Because someone hid it. Someone kept it safe. And that photograph is about to go public. For the first time in 100 years, you're going to see proof. Actual, photographic, undeniable proof. Are you ready? The photograph was taken on June 7, 1904. Location: Sayre, Pennsylvania. Excavation site at an ancient burial mound complex along the Chemung River. 3 men stand beside an open burial pit. Professional attire, suits and ties despite the heat. Behind them, laid out on canvas tarps, 7 complete skeletons. Even in the century-old photograph, you can see the proportions are wrong. The skulls are massive. The femurs extend far beyond normal human length. The rib cages dwarf those of the men standing nearby. The photographer was Dr. G.P. Donahue, Pennsylvania state historian, not a fringe researcher, not a tabloid journalist. The official state historian documenting an official state excavation. Standing beside him in the photograph, Dr. A.B. Skinner from the American Investigating Museum, and Professor W.K. Moorhead from Phillips Academy in Massachusetts. 3 credentialed professionals, 3 witnesses with reputations to protect. The excavation report exists, filed with the Pennsylvania Historical Commission, dated June 12, 1904, states clearly 7 skeletons recovered, heights ranging from 7 feet to 7 feet 8 inches, skulls exhibiting unusual morphology. Estimated age of burial between 800 and 1200 years. The report was public record, published in the Commission's annual proceedings, cited in newspapers across Pennsylvania and New York. And then, in 1917, it vanished, removed from the archives.
The annual proceedings for 1904 were reprinted. The excavation report, gone, replaced with a different report about colonial-era graves. But the photograph survived, because Dr. Donahue kept a personal copy, and his daughter Margaret inherited his papers when he died in 1936. Margaret knew what the photograph meant, knew it was evidence of something important, knew it proved the giants were real. She also knew what happened to people who made noise about this subject, so she stayed quiet, kept the photograph hidden, told nobody. Until 1989, when she was 91 years old, dying of cancer, and she called a local reporter named Jim Vieira. Jim Vieira wasn't famous in 1989. He was a stonemason,
Worked with his hands, built walls and foundations. But he had an interest in history, in megalithic structures, in the anomalies that mainstream archaeology ignored.
Margaret had read an article he'd written for a regional history magazine about stone chambers in New England, about questions he had regarding their origins. She liked his approach, careful, respectful, asking questions rather than claiming answers. So she invited him to her home, showed him her father's papers, and gave him the photograph. Told him to be careful. Told him powerful people didn't want this information public. Told him to make copies, hide them, spread them around, because something would happen. Someone would try to take it. She died 3 weeks later. Jim did exactly what she said, made 12 copies, high-resolution scans at a professional lab, distributed them to trusted friends, kept the original in a safe deposit box. Good thing, because 6 months later, his workshop was broken into.
Nothing valuable stolen, just files, papers, his research materials on giant skeletons. The safe deposit box wasn't touched, because they didn't know about it. Jim went public in 1993, presented the photograph at a conference on alternative archaeology, showed the excavation report, named the professionals involved, provided documentation. Academic community dismissed it, called the photograph a fake, said the excavation report was misremembered, claimed Donahue's reputation wasn't as solid as Jim suggested. But they couldn't prove the photograph was fraudulent, because it wasn't. Digital analysis in 2008 showed no signs of manipulation. The image was authentic, taken with period-correct camera equipment. Chemical analysis of the paper stock confirmed it dated to the early 1900s. The photograph was real, which means the skeletons were real, which means everything we've been told about giants being myths is a lie. Now let me show you something that connects everything. The 7 skeletons in that photograph weren't typical Native American burials. The report noted unusual features. The skulls had pronounced brow ridges, double rows of teeth in some specimens, skeletal robustness far exceeding modern human norms. And here's the detail that matters. The burial site included grave goods, tools, weapons, artifacts made from copper. Copper traced back to the Great Lakes region, Isle Royale specifically. Chemical analysis matched the mineral signatures. So we have giants in Pennsylvania, buried with copper from Michigan, 800 to 1200 years ago, which means trade networks, which means organization, which means these weren't isolated freaks. They were a population, a culture, sophisticated enough for long-distance trade. The burial mound itself was engineered, 40 feet diameter at the base, 12 feet high, constructed with specific layers. Clay, then gravel, then earth, then topsoil. Built to last. Built with knowledge. Who builds burial mounds like that? Not random hunter-gatherers, not primitive tribes.
Engineers build like that. People with architectural knowledge, with labor organization, with purpose. And remember Rockwall, the underground chambers, the fitted stones, the carved symbols. Remember the Goshen Tunnel, the smooth walls, the precise circular bore. Remember the copper mines, the industrial scale, the millions of tons of extracted ore. It's all connected, all part of the same civilization. A civilization we've been told never existed. But it did exist. The photograph proves it. The burial mounds prove it. The mines prove it. The structures prove it. We've just been trained not to see it. Let me tell you what happened to the skeletons from that photograph. According to Donhu's notes, which Margaret also preserved, the remains were transported to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia. Arrived June 23, 1904. Logged into their collection. Specimen numbers assigned. The museum planned an exhibit, Ancient Giants of Pennsylvania, scheduled to open in October 1904. It never opened. In September, the museum received a visit from federal inspectors from the newly created Department of Commerce and Labor. Said they were conducting routine inspections of institutions holding Native American materials. Not routine, targeted, specific. The inspectors seized the skeletons, said they were needed for government study, promised to return them within 6 months. Never returned them. Museum inquired multiple times, always got the same response. Study ongoing, results forthcoming. Specimens will be returned. By 1910, the museum stopped asking. By 1915, the museum closed entirely. Financial difficulties. Collections sold or transferred. Where did the 7 skeletons go? No record, no documentation. Gone. Same pattern. Same ending. Evidence collected, evidence removed, evidence disappeared. But this time we have the photograph. This time we have proof they existed. This time, they can't deny it. Now, here's where things get current. Because this isn't just historical suppression, it's ongoing. 2015. A high school teacher in Ohio named John Russell found a partial skull while hiking in the Wayne National Forest. Large skull, heavy bone structure, unusual morphology. He reported it to the U.S. Forest Service. They sent rangers to collect it, standard procedure for human remains found on federal land. Russell asked what would happen to it. Rangers said it would be examined, probably identified as Native American, returned to appropriate tribal authorities for reburial. Fair enough. Respectful process. Russell thought nothing more of it. Except he'd taken photographs before reporting it. Multiple angles, measurements using a tape measure, close-ups of distinctive features. 3 months later, out of curiosity, he filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Asked for any reports or analysis related to the skull he'd found. Provided the exact coordinates, the date, his contact information from the original report. Response came back. No records found. No skull matching his description had been logged by the Forest Service. Impossible. He'd spoken to 2 rangers. They'd filled out paperwork, given him a receipt number. He had the receipt. He tried again. Provided the receipt number, demanded explanation. Second response. The receipt number was invalid. No such documentation existed in their system. They'd erased it, completely, like the discovery never happened. Russell went public, posted his photographs online, shared his story, asked questions. His website was hit with a denial of service attack within 48 hours, taken offline. When it came back up, the photographs were gone. Server had been wiped. Backup drives at his home, stolen.
Break-in while he was at work. Nothing else taken, just his external hard drives. He still had prints, physical photographs. He scanned them, posted them again. This time the Forest Service contacted him directly, said he'd violated federal law by removing archaeological materials from federal land, even though he'd reported it immediately, even though he'd never taken the skull itself. They threatened prosecution, said he could face fines, jail time, unless he surrendered any remaining evidence and signed a non-disclosure agreement. He refused, hired a lawyer. The lawyer advised him to comply, said fighting the federal government was expensive, futile. Sign the agreement, move on. Russell signed. Part of the agreement required him to destroy any remaining photographs, confirm in writing that he'd done so. He lied, kept one print, hidden, just in case. I've seen that print. Met Russell in 2022. He's scared. Won't let me copy it. Won't let me photograph it. But he showed it to me. That skull is not normal human anatomy. It's too large, too robust. Bone thickness exceeding anything pathological conditions would explain. It's evidence, clear evidence, from 2015. They're still doing it. Still suppressing, still erasing. Right now. Today. So let's close the loops. Let's connect everything we've covered. Loop 1. The Smithsonian's missing specimens. Over 1,500 skeletal remains sent to the Smithsonian between 1863 and 1932. The institution claims none exist, but we have shipping receipts, we have letters confirming delivery, we have catalog references. Where did they go? Based on Roberts' documents from 2019, classified storage. Facilities not open to researchers, locations not disclosed, managed under national security protocols. They exist. They're hidden. Deliberately. Loop 2. Rockwall's underground structure. The wall is real, still there, still unexplained. The chambers Stevenson found, filled in but documented. The symbols on the black stone table, analyzed by Father O'Brien, destroyed by Stevenson, but fragments preserved. That structure wasn't natural. It was built by people with engineering knowledge, possibly the same people whose bones we keep finding, the same people who mined copper in Michigan. Loop 3. The federal suppression pattern. From James Buchanan Harris in 1855 to Forest Service cover-ups in 2015. Consistent behavior, consistent methods, seizure, denial, erasure. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented policy. Roberts' memorandum from 1956 proves it. The National Security Council was involved. Federal agencies coordinated suppression. Someone decided this information threatened something important enough to hide for over 160 years. Loop 4. The photograph. Dr. Donhu's photograph from 1904. Authenticated. Undeniable. Showing 7 giant skeletons with 3 credentialed witnesses. That photograph is the smoking gun. The proof they couldn't completely erase. The evidence that survived despite everything. And it's public now. Online. Distributed. Out of their control. They lost this one. Truth leaked through. But here's what I think is the deepest truth. The thing nobody wants to say out loud. The giants weren't primitive. They weren't evolutionary dead ends. They weren't genetic anomalies. They were advanced. More advanced than we've been willing to admit. Think about it.
They mined copper on industrial scales 3,000 years ago. They built underground structures with precision stonework. They established trade networks spanning thousands of miles. They buried their dead with ceremony and care. They created writing systems we still can't decipher. That's not primitive. That's civilization. And here's the terrifying question. If they were that advanced, what happened to them? Disease?
Maybe. Climate change? Possible. War? Could be. Or something else. Something we don't understand yet. Something that left traces in oral traditions across multiple cultures. Stories about floods, about fire from the sky, about the earth shaking, about the gods being angry. Every ancient culture has cataclysm stories. We treat them as myths, as primitive attempts to explain natural disasters. But what if they're memories? What if something catastrophic happened, something that wiped out advanced populations, something that reset human civilization, something that left only fragments behind? Fragments like burial mounds, like copper mines, like underground chambers, like giant bones. Fragments we've been systematically erasing because they suggest our history is wrong, our timeline is wrong, our understanding of human development is incomplete. And if we're wrong about the past, what else might we be wrong about? That's the real threat. That's why suppression continues. Not because giants existed, but because giants suggest a completely different human story, one we're not prepared to accept. Let me bring this home, because you need to understand what's at stake. In 2023, I submitted a FOIA request to the Smithsonian, requested access to any skeletal materials exceeding 7 feet in height, from pre-Columbian contexts, in their collections or storage. Standard request. Public institution, public records. Should be straightforward. First response came 6 months later. No such materials exist. I appealed, provided newspaper citations, shipping receipts, historical documentation proving materials were sent to them. Second response. Request denied. Reason given. Materials described don't meet criteria for public disclosure under current policy. Wait. First they said the materials don't exist. Now they're saying the materials can't be disclosed. Which is it? I pressed. Third request. Demanded clarification. Third response came from their legal department. Said further requests on this topic would be considered harassment. Threatened legal action if I continued. For asking about public records at a public institution funded by taxpayer money. That's where we are. That's the level of suppression. That's how seriously they take keeping this hidden. But here's the thing. I'm not the only one asking anymore. Jim Vieira has been researching this for 30 years. He's documented over 1,500 newspaper accounts. He's interviewed descendants of witnesses. He's photographed burial mounds. He's preserved evidence. Others are digging too. Independent researchers, amateur historians, people who don't need institutional approval to ask questions. The internet has changed everything. Information spreads faster than they can suppress it. Documents get archived, photographs get copied, stories get shared. They can't control the narrative anymore. Not completely. Truth is leaking out. In pieces. In fragments, but steadily, inevitably. And that brings me to you. You've watched this far. You've heard the evidence. You've seen the pattern. You understand what's been hidden and why. Now you have a choice. You can dismiss this, call it conspiracy theory,
Go back to the comfortable narrative. Believe what you're told. Forget you watched this. That's easy. That's safe. Nobody will challenge you. Nobody will call you crazy. Or you can do something harder. You can question. You can research. You can look at the sources yourself. The newspaper archives are public. Most libraries have microfilm collections. You can verify the accounts I've mentioned. See the reports with your own eyes. The Donahue photograph is online. Multiple sites host it. Download it. Share it. Make it impossible to erase. The burial mounds still exist. Many are protected sites now. You can visit them. Stand on ground where giants were buried. Feel the scale of the engineering. The evidence is still there. Scattered, suppressed, but findable, if you look. And if enough people look, if enough people ask questions, if enough people demand answers, they can't maintain the suppression forever. That's how truth wins. Not through dramatic revelations, not through whistleblowers or leaked documents. Through persistent questions from ordinary people who refuse to accept obvious lies. Let me tell you one final story. 1947, Lovelock Cave, Nevada. Remember that site where they found the red-haired giants? A descendant of one of the original miners contacted the Nevada State Museum, said his grandfather had kept something from the excavation, something he'd taken before the authorities sealed the site. A jawbone, massive, with teeth still intact. The museum agreed to examine it, took possession in 1948, photographed it, measured it, documented it. The jaw came from a human skull approximately 9 to 10 inches in height from base to crown. For scale, average modern human skull is 6 to 7 inches. This would indicate a living individual somewhere between 8 and 9 feet tall. The museum kept it on display until 1952, then moved it to storage. Reason given? Rotating exhibits. Need space for new displays. Never displayed again. In 1978, a researcher requested access. Museum said it had been lost. Storage facility flood. Materials damaged. Jawbone destroyed. Convenient. But here's the interesting part. That researcher, Dr. Howard Collins, didn't give up. He filed requests with other institutions, found that 3 universities had received plaster casts of that jawbone in 1948, before the museum lost it. Casts made for comparative study, standard academic practice. Collins tracked down those casts. University of California had one, still in their collections, never cataloged, never displayed, just sitting in a drawer. He examined it personally in 1981, confirmed the measurements matched the museum's documentation, confirmed the size was extraordinary. He tried to publish his findings. No journal would accept the paper. He tried presenting at conferences. Invitations withdrawn. He tried writing a book. No publisher interested. Collins died in 2007. His research materials were donated to a small private library in Oregon. I visited in 2021, found his files, photographed everything. The cast still exists. University of California still has it, listed in their internal catalog under Miscellaneous Skeletal Materials, Storage C. I submitted a request to view it. Denied. Materials too fragile for public handling. I offered to cover conservation costs, have it stabilized by professional conservators so it could be studied safely. Denied. No explanation given. It's there, physical evidence from a credible institution with documentation. With measurements, with photographs, and they won't let anyone see it. Because if people saw it, if scientists examined it, if DNA could be extracted, everything changes. The lie becomes impossible to maintain. So here's my challenge to you, my call to action. Share this information, not blindly, not uncritically, but thoughtfully, with the sources attached, with the evidence linked, with the documentation provided. Tell people about the Dunhu photograph. Show them it exists. Let them verify it's real. Tell them about the newspaper archives, the 1,500 documented accounts, the patterns of suppression. Tell them about Rockwall, about the wall that's still there, that anyone can visit, that geology can't explain. Tell them about Lovelock Cave, about the red-haired giants, about the jawbone that universities are hiding. Tell them about the Smithsonian's refusal to disclose, about FOIA denials, about legal threats against researchers.
Tell them the truth isn't conspiracy. It's documentation. It's evidence. It's physical reality being systematically denied. And ask them a simple question. Why? Why would institutions suppress this? Why would agencies threaten people? Why would evidence disappear? If it's all just myths and hoaxes, why fight so hard to hide it? That question is the crack in the wall. That's where light gets in. That's how you get people thinking. You don't need to convince them of anything. Just show them the suppression, the pattern, the behavior of institutions. Let them draw their own conclusions. Because here's what I've learned doing this research for 8 years. Most people don't reject this because the evidence is weak. They reject it because accepting it is terrifying. If the giants were real, everything we know is wrong. The textbooks are wrong. The museums are wrong. The authorities we trust have been lying for over a century. That's a hard pill to swallow. That's worldview shattering. So people choose comfort over truth, safety over knowledge, the familiar lie over the uncomfortable reality. I understand that. I don't judge it. But I won't participate in it. The giants existed. The evidence proves it. The suppression confirms it. And every day more people are learning the truth. Every day the lie gets harder to maintain. Every day we get closer to the moment when denial becomes impossible. That moment is coming. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but soon. Because truth has a weight, a gravity. It pulls, it attracts, it accumulates, and eventually it reaches critical mass, where enough people know, where enough evidence surfaces, where the official narrative collapses under its own contradictions. We're building toward that moment. Every share, every question, every person who refuses to accept the lie. You're part of that now, by watching this, by learning this, by knowing what you know. You can't unknow it. You can't unsee the pattern. You can't pretend the evidence doesn't exist. So what will you do with this knowledge? Let me end where we began, with the photograph. 7 skeletons, 3 witnesses, 1 camera, 1 moment in 1904 when truth was documented, preserved, saved. Margaret Donahue kept that photograph safe for 85 years, knowing what it meant, knowing what it proved, knowing someday it would matter. Jim Vieira made it public, risked his reputation, faced ridicule, preserved the evidence. Now it's ours, all of us. This truth belongs to humanity now, not to institutions, not to governments, not to academics who deny what they can't control. To us, to anyone willing to look, to anyone brave enough to question. The giants were real. They built, they mined, they traded, they thrived. And then they disappeared.
We don't know why. We don't know how. We don't know what happened. But we know they existed, despite everything, despite the suppression, despite the lies. They were here. And the proof survived, hidden in basements, locked in archives, buried in newspaper microfilm, scattered in private collections, waiting to be found. We're finding it, piece by piece, document by document, photograph by photograph. And when we have enough, when the evidence reaches critical mass, when denial becomes impossible, the story changes, history changes, everything changes. That's what they're afraid of. That's why they hide it. That's why they fight so hard to maintain control. Because once the truth is out, they can't put it back. They can't rewrite it. They can't erase it. It becomes permanent, real, undeniable. We're almost there, closer every day. Every person who watches this, every person who shares it, every person who refuses to forget. You're part of this now. You're part of the movement toward truth, toward knowledge, toward understanding who we really are, where we really came from, what history we've forgotten. The giants are calling to us across centuries.
Across burial mounds and copper mines and underground chambers, across suppressed documents and hidden photographs and erased records. They're calling us to remember, to question, to seek truth even when institutions demand we accept lies. Will you answer that call? Will you be part of revealing what's been hidden? Will you help bring the giants back into human history where they belong? The choice is yours. The evidence is here. The truth is waiting. All you have to do is look and refuse to look away.